Welcome everyone to the first edition of the SIPA Expert Series. Colorado SIPA was created by legislation in 2004 to create and manage the Colorado.gov portal and assist governments with their technology needs. While SIPA mostly provides no and low-cost software as a service, it also provides cybersecurity and professional consulting services to help governments put more information and services online. Today we're speaking with Cara Finch, SIPA's contract manager and legislative liaison. Cara has a law degree from Thomas M. Cooley Law School and more than 15 years of experience in government contracting. Cara, thanks for joining me to discuss government contracting. Will you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thanks for having me. Well, I did attend law school and I'm licensed in the state of Indiana. I will make the qualifying statement that I am neither SIPA's attorney nor am I licensed to practice in the state of Colorado. Therefore, none of this is intended to, nor shall it be considered me offering legal advice. So that's my caveat. Right. I am SIPA's contract manager, which means that I negotiate the terms for our contracts with our vendor partners. My expertise really is the entire end-to-end procurement to contracting process. So I worked for a local government in Indiana for 2 years as the purchasing manager, where I did the procurements and negotiated contracts. And then I was in higher ed for 13 years doing the same thing. And so the beauty of working in higher ed and then coming to government contracting is that it's very similar in that there are similar rules that have to be followed with the contract negotiations. As I mentioned, I do have experience in the end-to-end procurement and contracting process. So I've led complex RFPs for software applications. I then led the contract negotiations, and I also have done the overall ongoing management of those contracts and the contract deliverables. So all that to say, I am well-versed in the whole process of procurement and contracting from end to end.
Excellent. Sounds like you do have a lot of experience there. Thank you. So speaking as far as SIPA specifically, what is SIPA's process when negotiating vendor contracts?
So oftentimes SIPA customers or even potential vendors will approach us about entering into a contract. And sometimes that's because the two parties haven't been able to reach a successful negotiation. So that's sometimes where we come in. Once the vendor is identified, we make sure that they meet our mission with their offerings, and assuming that they are a good fit, then really the first step is me getting in touch with their legal team, and we prefer to send our standard template for our master service agreement. We call that our paper versus using the vendor paper, which would be the vendor's template. And that's really because we have drafted a template that meets our needs. So we start with that document. I send it over to the vendor, and really that's when the redlining starts. They make red lines to terms that they can't agree to. And a lot of it's just back and forth negotiations. There are certain things that we hold very firm and that we won't budge on. And so hopefully we get to a point where we are able to do some give and take that is mutually beneficial to both us and the vendor.
Sure. Okay. And I would imagine that helps Colorado governments out quite a bit, would you say?
Yeah. I mean, most often it allows Colorado governments to buy things that they may not be able to buy from a vendor if they're not able to reach a successful negotiation on their own. And we're also able to offer them discounted rates.
Excellent. Okay. And I'm sure that's very helpful to local governments.
Yeah.
So in terms of looking at the contract specifically, what are the most important things that you say that you look for?
So this has probably changed over the years, just due to the nature of software and technology in general. But really the primary things that we look at are insurance coverage. That has evolved to ensuring that they have cyber liability. So that's something that we may not have focused on 10 years ago, but understanding that we are obviously open to more risk without that cyber liability. That's something that we do require our vendors to have, as well as limitation of liability, so that if there is some kind of breach, that we have written into our contract that there is a remedy to be able to fix that, whatever the cost associated with that breach is. If it's a contract or a software application where personal information may be within that application, then we make sure that the vendor has the appropriate security standards that meet the state's requirements. And then lastly, indemnification is always a big sticking point.
So it sounds like there is quite a bit that we have to look out for on these contracts. For the governments that aren't working with us or are working on their own contract negotiation, what would you say that they need to be mindful of?
First, I would say they should just come use our contracts. But really the things that I would say probably slip through the cracks are associated with travel costs and expenses. So you want to make sure that if you have a contract for, let's say, consulting services, and it's for a set amount of money, but then there's also travel associated with that, that you've defined what that should be. So if a government entity is going to be paying for the travel costs associated with that consulting engagement, they may have a not to exceed amount, meaning we'll cover the cost of travel, but it won't be more than this amount of money. Just to make sure that that's defined within the agreement itself. You also, I think, want to make sure that there are appropriate insurance limits for general liability, cyber liability, professional liability. I would also say, do a Google search of the vendor and make sure that they're a reputable vendor, that they don't have, they don't have anything in their background that you wouldn't want to see on the front page of the paper. I mean, if you're using public funds, so you want to make sure that you're using reputable vendors that have a good reputation. So, and also that their liability, the limitation of liability is sufficient in the event that there's some issue or a breach. And then lastly, just pay attention to that indemnification clause. Sure,
of course. Okay, excellent. Well, that's a lot of great information on this. So thank you for taking the time to speak with us today, Cara. If you're interested in learning more about how SIPA does contracting or more tips for doing contracting on your own, SIPA has a white paper with more information posted on our website at sipa.colorado.gov. Once again, thank you, Cara, for taking the time to speak with us today, and we'll catch you on the next expert piece.